Thanks for being with me. Just another conversation about the voice and particularly what the right wing's saying at the moment. It's always interesting to hear where they're coming from, what they have to say, what stupid and ridiculous comments they make about Indigenous affairs and particularly the voice in particular. So today, the racist of our time, namely Andrew Bolt, is talking to Andrew Mundine about the voice and what that means. And it fascinates me to some extent because there is nothing positive that they could say about Indigenous affairs, the fact that an effort is being made in order to recognise First Nations people in our Constitution, and that we're providing an opportunity for them to have a voice to Parliament that they have never had in this format before. Now, I agree. There are a number of politicians. I think there might be 11 politicians that are First Nations people in Parliament, which is fabulous. But this is about reaching out across all the communities in Australia to discover from them what it is that they need specifically for their communities. Now, I can't understand why you would not support the voice. I can't see how it's going to impact anyone negatively. But Mr. Bolt still seems to think that for some reason this is a third chamber of Parliament. He obviously hasn't read any of the statements made by Anthony Albanese and doesn't want to believe for a moment that this is an advisory capacity that's being offered to Indigenous people in a way which has never happened. And of course, we've got Mundine, a previous president actually of the Australian Labor Party, who's now switched allegiances and now appears to be fighting for the right and talking to Bolt about his issues in relation to all of this. So I'll just play a little bit of Andrew spouting crap, and we will dissect it as we go through it.
I want to get back to the Prime Minister's big announcement today about the voice, to talk about a massive sellout that no one's talking about.
Well, it's this is interesting about the sellout because I am at a loss as to actually what he thinks Albanese and the government is selling out to. So it seems to me that they'll make these statements later on about the privileged Indigenous people that are making these decisions. So what they've decided to do is to put aside for a moment the fact that there are all these white people that make decisions around Aboriginal affairs, and they've been doing that since Federation. So they want to put that aside now, and what they're doing is skewing that in some way so that we're now confronted with this notion that there are a select number of privileged Indigenous people who are making these decisions for Aboriginal people. Now, the whole purpose of the voice is that this is not the case, that there will be a plethora of people who will be making decisions. Exactly how that happens perhaps is a little bit unknown at the moment, what that comprises of, what it looks like. But certainly they're suggesting that that be a group of people right around Australia who will all get together and talk about the issues that impact them and legislation which may be needed to assist them, so that closing the gap report in a few years can look far different from what it looks like right now, where the life expectancy of Indigenous people is 10 times greater, incarceration rates are 3 times greater than their population, a number of children being removed from their family is extremely high, domestic violence, mental health issues and drug use is extremely high, also within some Indigenous communities. So how we deal with that depends upon the communities. And as Albanese said yesterday, there are many, many programs that are run and organised by Indigenous people that have proved that when Indigenous people have control over their own environment and how they want to live, the outcomes are far more significant. So maybe it's about us backing away, us white people, and deciding for black people or Indigenous people how they should be living their lives. However, Andrew Bolt does not seem to be able to grasp this concept at all, because he filters everything through a racist view. So we'll just pop him up again and see what else he has to say.
Weakness too, in fact a disgrace. Anthony Albanese today made clear that he has caved in to another demand of the powerful Aborigines who have designed this voice, this kind of Aboriginal-only parliament that, by the way, can never get sacked. That cave-in is this: there will be no democracy. Democracy was great for the Athenians.
So I find
2,000 years ago.
I find this interesting. So this is a right-wing trope that we quite often hear, is that if you go down a certain path, which is progressive, and which is about, ostensibly it's about change. So once we go down that path, it becomes a destruction, if you like, of democracy, and that's it's just untrue. The point is that we need to be more progressive. We need to try to find different ways of working so that we can bring about significant change, particularly for the most disadvantaged people in our community. And people like Bolt, who are not disadvantaged, who are themselves independent and wealthy, who do have a voice because they've got this stupid, ridiculous show on Sky News, then they can't see that there are other people in the community who are disadvantaged, who don't have the advantages that they do. And they can't make that comparison in their head. I doubt whether Andrew Bolt has ever experienced poverty, shame, cultural disadvantage. He may experience, I don't know, he might experience some issues around drug use, who knows, mental health issues. He works for Sky News, so clearly he's got an issue around that. Who knows what issues that he's got. But at the end of the day, he doesn't know people really that live in that world. His world and his bubble is it's a Sky News, Murdoch type bubble. This is where he lives. This is how he conducts his life. And speaking to people like Mundine, as he does in a moment, is probably the only way he can validate his own existence, by talking to an Indigenous person who's completely on his side of the fence. So let's see what else he has to say.
But apparently it's going to be denied to Aborigines. The members of this voice will not have to be elected at all. Selected, yes. Elected, no. Because the theory is that would undermine the power of the Aboriginal aristocracy that has presided over the social disaster.
Okay, so notice the use of the word the Aboriginal aristocracy. So he's setting the Aboriginal people up as being different, yet doesn't acknowledge the political aristocracy that has caused this bullshit around the disadvantage that sits in our community for decades, for hundreds of years, in fact. So I find it disingenuous, I find it disgraceful, I find it a language which most of us should be absolutely revolted by. But here he is spouting this crap, and later on he brings on Mundine just to confirm it.
Bush for decades. So the members of the voice will instead be appointed by existing bodies or by local leaders or in accordance with so-called Aboriginal traditions. There will be some hand-picking as well.
So notice even that, so-called Aboriginal traditions. So they're not real traditions, they're just so-called traditions. So his effort to minimise what are Indigenous experiences, I find absolutely disgraceful.
We've got to have some youth voices, etc. But who actually does this, Albanese refuses to say. And the voice, what's more, will not replace one single one of the thousands of Aboriginal groups already out there.
It will be representative of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities with a gender balance and include youth. The Voice will work alongside existing organisations and traditional structures, respecting their work.
So much for that argument. I want to see how the Voice will work alongside existing structures. So they're not getting rid of anything. The things that work will be maintained. The things that don't work, where organisations of all descriptions are ripping off Indigenous people and taking money out of the coffers that should be going elsewhere, my guess is they're going to be disbanded.
What is going on? Joining me is Warren Mundine, head of the No Campaigns Recognise a Better Way. Warren Mundine, thanks for your time. Let me first ask you overall, the details the Prime Minister released today, your reaction?
Look, I just find it bizarre that they've had all these secret meetings and been arguing and carrying on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then they come up with the same thing that they had 6 months ago. I just find it quite bizarre.
I just wonder whether they're secret meetings because, Warren, you were not invited, buddy. They don't care about you. They figured that your Indigenous people thought that perhaps you didn't have anything constructive to say, so they didn't invite you, and your nose is put out of joint.
This thing is just a disaster. And you just pointed out some really big problems. What it is about is cementing the people who have been running Indigenous affairs for the last 50 years, and you've got the disastrous problems that we have today. This is not going to improve one person's life on the ground.
I like the way he just makes this statement about it's not going to improve. No evidence for any of that, no justification for anything that he's saying, and that he just seems to believe that because this man was not given a position on the table, which I guess we can all understand given he's so negative, he's pissed off. And because he's pissed off, he's going to tell everybody that this thing is not going to work without any real justification. Because, as Bolt's saying, this is the First Nations aristocracy. Now, I just want to make this point before I go, that there'll be a lot of Indigenous people who will be a party to all of this, who will be young, who are the next generation, who are those people that are impacted mostly by what has been happening to them in their regions. They are the ones that are going to progress this. They're the ones that are going to take this to the next level. They're the ones that are definitely going to make a difference. So I'm looking forward to seeing this manifest in a way which is going to benefit Indigenous people, and I'm hoping that it'll make all of us feel better about how we treat and how we help, and by producing better outcomes for Indigenous people. Thanks everybody for being with me. Take care, look after yourselves and be safe.